welcome back to Design Deconstructed. This is episode 15, where we're going to take a look at chapter 9, which is called To Catch a Spider from End of Dragons. And this has the distinction of being a completely open world story step. There are no story instances whatsoever, which created a number of challenges for us. Open world story steps are always a bit difficult to do sometimes in regards to having to account for player disconnections. We have to do, they can get really easily distracted by events and get pulled off in different directions, and so we have to get kind of crafty about how we make sure that we are messaging what players are supposed to be doing and when, making sure that dialogues are clear and they aren't getting stomped by other open world event dialogues, which is always a bit of a juggling act. We don't do it perfectly because there's no way to know exactly what the state of the world is at any one time when players are triggering story content in the open world. But I think we did a really good job with this story step. It went from being kind of one of the story steps that I dreaded working on to being one that I actually feel really comfortable and confident with that we did the best job that we could with it. So I'm particularly proud of it as far as open world story steps go. It has a branching point at the start of it, which is also something that adds complications in scoping. We have to design around what players are choosing to do, and giving player agency is always a thing that we love to do, but it does come at a cost, so we have to manage those costs effectively. And I think we did that here quite nicely. And it also had the distinction of being kind of a challenge in the sense that a lot of this story stuff was developed well before there was any open world content in the map whatsoever. The map was pretty much laid out from the map artists, but there was nothing to do in it because the open world designers had not yet rolled onto the team. They were finishing up Icebrute Saga in a lot of cases, so there wasn't a ton of things for us to work from. So we ended up having to do a little bit of like pre-planning and breadcrumbing, using placeholder assets and gadgets to kind of simulate, hey, here's where content will go eventually, which is always fun to try to like get in review and show this stuff to the leads and be like, just use your imagination because something will go here eventually, and trying to make sure that feels solid, and it doesn't, right? Like there's no world in which, no matter how sophisticated a bucket I make of that simulates content, it's not the same as the actual content, and the content in this map is quite good. So like it definitely, my buckets of content that I sort of stubbed in were pale in comparison to what we ended up shipping in Ender Dragons. So yeah, that's sort of the primer on this chapter, and I'm excited to get in and let you take a look at it and get behind the scenes with me. So without further ado, let us hop into game, and I will see you in just a second. All right, welcome back to Design Deconstructed. This is episode 15, where we are going to take a look at chapter 9 of End of Dragons, which we will get into game in just one second. Starting off in Arborstone, which is now a hub. Once the players finish that previous story chapter, you enter Arborstone and you're introduced to some of the new things that you can do in that, including there's a mastery point, or a mastery line that unlocks, that enables you to customize and upgrade Arborstone, which is called the Arborstone Revitalization. Just waiting for everything to load. Sometimes the game does kind of strange things with loading, where it loads in things one piece at a time. Like, for example, it has not loaded the doors yet. I don't know why. Maybe I've got a slow network connection this morning. There it is. That's very interesting sometimes the way that our stuff works. Okay. Is there anything that I want to say about this? This is I think one of the biggest open world story steps that we have in End of Dragons. Open world story is very different, and it's also something that is kind of a challenge, because when we set out to say, okay, we're going to have an open world story step here, we are very reliant on and have to collaborate very closely with the design team working on the open world maps, and that's not always something that you can line up. You have to work really closely together, and sometimes they're not ready for what we're doing, or we're not ready for what they're implementing. So you have to get really, really smart about communicating. And we used, for this particular section where you're entering the command quarters, we use the same sort of technology that we used in my Trin's apartment, where technically this is an open world space. Other players might very well be in here, but we can't see them because we put players into their own visibility space. Again, because this is a very small space, having a cluster of players in here would be kind of obtrusive sometimes, so we hide them from each other. It's a little bit of a, hack around the fact that, story is best told when you can actually see what's going on and the characters involved. And so, like, if there's 20 players clustered around Marjorie and Tiny here, you could easily miss what they're doing, what they're saying. So we've been using this a little bit more. I'm guessing we'll continue to do similar things. Normally we would have created in the past, what we would have done for this is we would have created this space as what we call a pocket instance. And a pocket instance is basically just a small little instanced version of content where you enter by yourself and the content is authored just for you. But those can get expensive from both a production standpoint and a QA standpoint. And so we were sort of trying a different approach here, where this is technically open world. I will say I'm not sure in hindsight. I don't know that this is less expensive to build, because you have to do a lot of sort of scripting trickery to make these characters per player visible. You have to make players now, invisible to each other. So there's a little bit more of a cost to doing it this way than there used to be, because we're continuing to try to push our boundaries and set standards higher. So yeah.
Ever since the reactor was destroyed, June's been trying to figure out how to fix it. And see what we built?
I did notice you look a little different.
If you notice, I didn't focus on it, but Tiny, when she is showing off her new braces on her leg armor, she kicks her leg out and raises her arm up. And that's actually, literally, we just stole the emote from, I think there was one of the anniversary, novelty items where you would stand on a rock and you'd raise your hand up in victory salute. We literally just stole that animation, and without the rock and the Guild Wars 2 effects that pop up behind you, it made it look like she was lifting her leg out, like, look at this. So yeah, we're always getting crafty. I believe Connor Fallon actually was the one who made that suggestion to me of, like, try that out and see if it worked, and it actually really worked quite well. Alright, so let's leave this space. Another thing that I was scared about... Oh, sorry. There's also a little bit of a Easter egg here, where if you linger or are about to leave, Kaz calls Jory and they have a cute, sweet little moment here. Oh. I love this exchange. I love that they're so cute together. Talking about, you know, very adult things in our T for Teen rated game. That's about as far as we can go when we come talking about, you know, romance and adult relationships. I also will say you probably saw there was another player who did enter in because we have this. I don't know. I'm on a slow connection today. Apparently, our internet is lagging somewhat. What we actually got to see that player enter this space and then they disappeared. That was us witnessing them getting turned into an invisible character for us. But yeah, because internet is slow, it took a while for that message to get to me. So you got to see them for a couple seconds. Yeah, as I was also going to say, one of the other things that we did in this space that was a bit of a risk and something that I was a little unsure about doing because it was kind of, you know, dicey, which is removing the skill bar down here, because God forbid I remove the player's skill bar and they leave this leave this little thing, this little cubby, and their skill bar doesn't come back, because then they wouldn't be able to play the game, which would really suck. So we made sure that we tested that as thoroughly as we could test it. But yeah, that was kind of a frightening moment. Like, yeah, should we do this? I don't know. But I think it works really well because that was another thing that we wanted to do to sort of signify that this is a different space. This is a very distinct. You're there to watch a cinematic, basically, an in-game cinematic moment. And so by taking away some of the UI elements, I think that helps clarify things. Now, there's also hidden reasons why I did that from the other standpoint, which is, so even though you go in there and I put you on an invisibility channel, if you use certain skills while you're in there, like if I was, for example, if I enter again, and if I was a necromancer and I could punch my skill bars and start summoning minions, those minions would appear here, and they would not be on the visibility channel that you are on, because I'm only doing that check when you enter the space, enter and leave the space, which is why I have you interact with the door here. The door is basically controlling all of that visibility stuff. Once you're in that space, you can do things that kind of break the intention of what we try to do there. So it's not a perfect system. Nothing in game development ever is. You just try to account for as many of the things as you can. And so yeah, that's another reason why I take the skill bar away, is to make it clear that, hey, you probably don't want to use your skills here. I don't know if you can actually get around that. There's probably ways to get around that. You might be able to just hotkey, like press buttons and have those skills still fire. I don't think disabling the skill bar from the UI actually disables the skill bar. So yeah, maybe if you're bored and want to try that. And it'll probably get reported to me as a bug in a week. And then I'll have to fix it. Okay.
Hey, I've been experimenting with this really interesting camping tech. It's an autonomously driven deconstructor. Breaks down complex items into their component parts.
So, what are you working on here? Looks like some kind of Aetherblade tech.
The Kestrels found it in Echovolt, beeping like crazy. I think it's one of those airship transponders Renyak damaged.
This is not obviously, because you see another player here. This is not using the same technology with visibility channels. This is just two NPCs in the open world. They're phased so that you only see these if you're on this story step.
How could it possibly be Aetherblade? Renyak could have fixed it up when he got here. I don't know.
Could it help us find Anka?
Maybe. Just need to triangulate the signal destination. You could do that, right?
Can I do it, he asks. We'll get it done, Commander.
Commander, meet me at the entrance when you've got a minute. Ayumi's here with a new report about Anka.
Alright. Yeah, so we can talk to Gorik and Ivan again.
So,
Ivan is a very interesting character.
I'm glad you
he kind of was championed by a couple members of the team. I wasn't sold on him as a character, but by the end of development, I was really like impressed with what we had done with him as a character. You know, the Dredge are not the most interesting race. They have some unfortunate baggage in the way that they were portrayed in the core game. Maybe a little too, I don't know, caricatured, I guess I feel. But you know, I think with the more recent examples of the kind of Dredge characters that we've used, we've tried our best to make those a little more sophisticated and nuanced than just like, you know, I don't know. They were fairly simplistic from a story perspective, and I think we've done some good jobs with Ivan, other of our notable Dredge characters, at fleshing them out and making them a little bit more interesting than just, you know, they were slaves of the dwarves at one time, and you know, so yeah, giving them a little more, I don't know, flesh on the bones, I guess I would say. Whee! I don't have flying mounts, so I can't Griffin or Sky Scale my way down there. Alright. Go speak with the big-hatted man.
Commander, I trust you and your friends are comfortable?
Very. The Kestrels have been more than accommodating. Thank you.
Yumi was just telling me that Anka's been pretty busy since her little...
This is an interesting thing to talk about here, where, as you noted, like,
She's been sending
above,
paper
when I went
bullets
up to
meet
talk
with
to
both of the
Ivan
criminal gangs
and
here at
Gorik,
Devilwald.
that was a player interaction. You had to hit F to talk to them.
Except working with
Mostly
Anka,
because,
apparently.
again, like, we try to distinguish these sorts of interactions with characters
I've got
by
pistols stationed
intention.
outside
So
each of their camps.
in the
Copy
case
that.
where the
They'll
player
be
is
inside.
either the first one to speak, or they are sort of like looking for somebody, like in that case we were looking for Ivan, and sorry, we were looking for Gorik, and we just happened to run into Ivan. But because we were looking for Gorik, we put an interact there, because we want that to be, hey, player call to action is go find them. So it's an active thing, right? Whereas this one, and this is, you know, really super nitty-gritty details, but this one, because Rama calls us and says, hey, you know, come meet me over here, Rama is sort of the one to initiate that exchange. He's asking you to talk to him. So the minute you get in range, it makes sense that those two NPCs would be like, oh, hey, Commander, come over here, right? Like they would start talking to you and not wait for you to interact with them. So again, these are simple little things that we try to do to account for, or at least I try to do. I don't know, like, you know, those are my personal rules. I don't know that we've ever codified it as like, this is what we must do as quest designers. But
Sometimes we Kestrels go places we aren't
oh yeah.
exactly
Yeah, I mean, they
in
have optional dialogues.
Those
I'm not
guys
going to
had a lot of
sit
practice
through all of them
working
just because
Brotherhood and
there's
speaker
quite a few of them,
illusions.
and we're
They'll
moving
make
on.
sure you blend in.
This is also a new thing that we've started to do, where when you interact and start a new dialogue, when the dialogue is finished, it brings the conversation window back so that you can maintain the momentum of the conversation rather than, again, forcing you to interact. And then the last thing that I'll say about this before we move on into the open world is we also now have a thing that we've started to do that's kind of become our standard, where if you start a new open world dialogue, you can't spam open world dialogues. It used to be that you could just fire off all the dialogues, and you know, like our philosophy on that has just kind of always been like, well, I mean, if the player wants to ruin their own experience by loading up 6 dialogues at once, that's their choice. But I think we kind of arrived at a more sensible decision, which is let's not give them the tools to do that, like, because there's no world in which that feels good, right? Like, so yeah. So we try to make it so that characters who are talking together and have lots of dialogue don't just stomp all over each other, because it's rude. And Rama is anything but rude. He's a sophisticated gentleman. With the big hat. Yeah. So let's head out to Echovald. Gorgeous map. Justin Fawcett did both Arborstone and Echovald. I mean, it's really one map because Echovald is sort of like the top quarter of the northwest part of Echovald. So it is all sort of sitting on one map
Did you
art
ever
file.
catch up to Sue One?
We did. In the Jade Sea. We're working with the local authorities to keep her from moving beyond Cantha.
They didn't trust us at first. They'd seen the news bulletins blaming Aureen for Q1's escape.
Alright, so now we have a choice. This is a player choice point where you can either go to the Jade Brotherhood camp or the Speakers camp, depending on which one you want to explore. There are some achievements that kind of push you back and forth between both camps.
Already experienced its effects here in Echovald firsthand.
So that you can kind of see, but once you make a choice, you're kind of locked in. We did that because we initially had it where you could basically do them all at one point, and it just got so messy, and QA kind of gave us the side eye of like, you really want us to test what happens if I go to the Speakers camp and I do part of the Speakers camp, and then I go to the Jade Brotherhood camp and I do part of the Jade Brotherhood camp, and then I go do something else and I go back to the Speakers camp and I progress that heart. What happens to the Jade Brotherhood step? Does it get completed? Does it get removed? Does it get reset? Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we've kind of backed off a bit on some sophisticated player choices and branching dialogue and branching interactive narrative, because it's not easy to do. It quickly bloats scope. It makes everybody have to do a lot of extra work, consider all the different permutations, and it's just, I mean, it's great when we can pull it off, and I think in this case we came to a fairly reasonable. Oh my gosh, so much dialogue. This is one of the downsides of just rushing towards your objective. You trigger all these tripwires. You know, ideally, yes, we're having players stop and smell the roses. I'm going to do the Speakers camp. But yeah, anyway, to kind of finish off my thought on sort of branching narrative, it's really great when we can do it, when we can afford to do it in the way that is both meaningful and not going to kill one or another teams in terms of like having to account for all these different choices. Because it's not just us, you know, it impacts the open world design, because again, all this is open world story. There's no instances in this chapter at all. So like, it's not like we can, you know, kind of have a soft like, okay, here's a point where we can checkpoint your progress. There is no checkpointing progress in this step outside of what the quest system is tracking. And that can get really complicated really quickly if we let it. So yeah. So we're going to head in. We're going to do a disguise. This is a thing that I love that we did. We put in feminine, masculine, and neither. I think that's fantastic that we're doing a little bit more to have better representation for different people who play our game. But since my character is a female character, I am going to stick with a female appearance for this. This is a thing that, you know, is one of those video gaming things of like, we were invisible to talk to so-and-so and, you know, get into the camp, but then we kind of appear right in front of them and they're like, and they don't react. I kind of wish we had put in a optional dialogue where they're like, whoa, where'd you come from? I don't think it'd be weird because, you know, the speakers are guerrilla, you know, kind of combatants, so I don't think that they would be super put off or annoyed by the fact that you kind of snuck up on them, but they don't react at all, which is kind of a bummer. Anyway, okay, so we got to sabotage the camp. This is a thing where for the longest time, because again, this was a case where story got got out pretty far ahead on this chapter because this was one of the first chapters we kind of knew we were going to do. And so I was able to get in here and start prototyping it fairly quickly. And it was way before the open world designers were even rolled onto the project in some cases. So like for the longest time, this entire step was just stubbed in with an interactable gadget, which I just spawned a bucket, and I literally called it Bucket of Content because it was, we had no idea what kind of content was going to be in this map yet, because the at least two of the designers, if I remember correctly, who are working on the open world content for this map were finishing up Icebrewed Saga, and so they weren't even at the point where they could talk to me about like what their plans were. They had no no real clue. Oh, I'm apparently gonna get kicked out. Yes, I'm an infiltrator. Sorry, I got booted. Well, there goes my achievement for being sneaky. I'm very not sneaky in our game. Where's the heart guy? I guess he's doing his job and being stealthy, unlike me. Yeah, this is one of the NPCs you can speak to while you're on this quest step. You can speak to Shisokana, and I can't remember the other one's name. But they will give you sort of like side quests in a way. They have these achievements. I'll just start this one. I don't really need to finish it. But this one is called Silenced Voices. Oh, and I'm gonna get my face eaten by a tiger. But yeah, I designed these to be kind of like side quests where you speak to him, and then he's like, "Look, I want to infiltrate the speakers too, but we need to like frame somebody as being maybe a spy working for the Jade Brotherhood. So you have to go to the Jade Brotherhood camp, and so you kind of I shuttle the players back and forth between the two camps to do those achievements. In hindsight, I'm not sure I would have approached it the same way. I had something in mind for that I think seemed cooler in my head than what I ended up implementing. Yeah. Just gonna free some ghosties. That's the easiest thing I think to do in this heart. The bomb ones take longer, so I often find that I get caught when I try to sabotage bombs. And this dude is stealthily running around with his giant jade mech. No, I don't want to fight you. This is a funny thing. Connor Fallon did the composites. The look. The composite basically is what we call the outfits, armor, and sort of faces and hairs that we then put on NPCs because it uses our armor compositing system. That the one that players have that allows them to mix and match pieces, right, to make their character unique. So character composites are what we put on NPCs. When he got around to designing the speakers as composites, he reached out to me. He's like, "Would you be offended if I made all of the speakers go barefoot?" And I was like, "Why would I be offended by that? You'd be, I'd be happy if they were all barefoot. I'd be happy if more characters in our game were barefoot." He's like, "Well, because they're like terrorists and things, and like I don't want to like make it a thing like people who go barefoot are weird." I'm like, or evil. It's like I think it's pretty clear that like them going barefoot everywhere is not the reason they are bad. And I don't even know, like, there's a lot of interesting discussions we had about whether or not the speakers are in fact bad. I mean, they're certainly misguided in their approach to their goals, but I can't say I disagree with their goals, which is, in some respects, like they want to preserve nature and the forest. You know, they're a bit zealous about it, and so maybe they could learn to chill out a little bit. That was actually the thing that I was going to say to Connor that I don't think we ever talked about was, if anything, them going barefoot would probably chill them out quite a bit. So, you know, although I don't know, as somebody who's been in the barefooting community for a long time, I'm very much less engaged than I used to be. But I have definitely had run-ins with some fairly, I'll say, extreme barefooters who take their barefooting very seriously, and so maybe they would fit in here in this. Anyway, yeah. So I filled up the heart. Excellent. And then I get a mail from a friend. It's always interesting to give mail, because I always worry that people's mailboxes are really full, and then I remember that, oh, I think game mails are always going to go to players regardless of whether they have a full mailbox or not. Anyway, you'd think I'd learn that after all this time. Thread the needle. I'm so glad they have such short sight.
Proper outpost only sent half of what they owe us in fees.
Yeah, this we went a little bit back and forth on the location of this NPC. I definitely wanted them to be up high and sort of out of the way because they're spying, right? This NPC where we're gonna meet now is an undercover kestrel. So they, like us, are also in disguise. And so I wanted them to be up, you know, with a nice vantage point so they could kind of keep their eye on everything that was going on. But this location was not easy to get to. So we definitely had some back and forth about whether this was too hard for players to find. We got a lot of feedback initially that I have no idea where I'm supposed to go. I see the green star on my map, but no idea like how to get there. I don't know. I haven't seen too many people on live complaining that they were hard to find, so I think we probably solved that problem. But yeah. I love this group of Jade Brotherhood spies. They're also spying. I guess I don't need to take care of them, but... Alright. Float.
2 years? He's never managed to break free?
What happened with that outsider we caught?
Tetra gave the Sky Pirate to the ritualists for a chat. Apparently they got a lot out of him. Saw a notebook that was full of intel change hands. Inga said the screams were, well, he's still not sleeping through the night. Better we don't know what happened.
This part where you eavesdrop was at least partially inspired by well, some of this just open world content just in general was inspired by some of the early Assassin's Creed games had what they called social stealth, which was a really cool thing that I was enjoyed in their games, where like if you were trying to blend in, you could like sit on a bench, right, and you could blend into the crowd, and you could maybe eavesdrop on somebody or tail somebody. So you know, I kind of loved that we did our take on that kind of system, where you know you're in disguise, and so the things you do are tracked, and you have to be really careful about your movements and your how you're being perceived by the rest of the group. You know, I think it's, you know, it's always tough because our game is so combat focused and combat oriented that doing anything that's not combat is sometimes kind of a challenge. I think we did pretty decent job with this social stealth mechanic. I can probably think of better ways that we could have done a couple of these little interactions, but yeah, I mean, again, it's tough because what else do you do if you don't have your skills? All right. And to be clear, like, we did talk about having, like, maybe when you go into the skies, you get a different skill bar that has things like stand around or, you know, pretend to do this or pretend to do that. And that would have been cool, but we definitely get a lot of sort of negative pushback or feedback when we replace the player's skill bar, because, you know, players want to do what they are good at doing.
Learn anything at the speakers
I don't
camp,
know.
Commander?
This feels like a case where I think it would have been okay.
Ivanka was after her stolen tech, not the pirate's
yeah.
life. Then she backed out.
Taming the pirate.
The other thing we have to do a lot of for open world story steps that we do not necessarily have to do in instances is when you have dialogues like this, we have to account for, well, what happens if the player disconnects? What if they lose internet connection? What if they have to, like, you know, their partner, their significant other, their parent, whoever is like calling them away, and they have to like just quit the game real quick because they've like got to go, I don't know, to the grocery store. You know, like, there's all kinds of reasons why players can just dump out of the game in the open world, and we have to be able to pick them up right where they left off. I mean, it will remember what active step they have, but sometimes when you're listening to a dialogue, there is no active step necessarily. There might be, you might be in this quest limbo is what we call it, where you're kind of in between steps. So we have to do a bunch of extra scripting sometimes to account for all of those edge cases, and QA has to run through it all, and they do, as part of their test pass on open world story steps, they will be disconnecting in the middle of every dialogue, disconnecting in the middle of every step, you know, just making sure that, hey, if there's a disconnect, what happens, right? Like, what state does the quest system think that you're in, and how can we make sure that we aren't leaving players in a weird state? Because we have done that in the past. It's probably likely that that may happen again in the future because it is such a difficult thing to track and keep hold of. Yeah, but you know, because we know this and we've done this many times, I think we're quite good now at understanding what we need to do to prevent those things from happening. This was an interesting thing where we had a lot of feedback too about this, locating this Aetherblade camp. So I tried to be as obvious as I could. I put a giant swoop around it, and I put 2 arrows saying, "Hey, these are the paths you want to find to get to it." And then once you get here, you know, we put a light here, so it's different. Hopefully, it stands out. There's a shimmer here. I think there's an audio cue. I can't remember if we ended up doing that or not. We definitely had feedback that we should do an audio cue. There's usually a couple of Aether Blades, you know, sort of camped out right outside this, so that it's super obvious that it's a hologram wall. But yeah, we still had, even up to the day that we locked everything down, I think we still had feedback that it was still too hard to find. So hopefully, if you've played this, you didn't find it too hard. You know, it's always one of those things of like, I know with like games like Elden Ring and stuff like that, there's a lot of games that are moving more in the direction of letting players have a little bit of that, you know, lost feeling and not not being super prescriptive and giving you exactly like, go here, do this, right? Like Guild Wars 2, we definitely have a little bit more of the go here, do this mentality. And so sometimes I think because we do that, when we do have something that's a little more open-ended, or it does require you to kind of, you know, take a look around for something, it can be frustrating, and I totally understand that. So we try to not to do it too much, and when we do it, we try to get a little more sort of that environmental storytelling involved, of like, maybe the game isn't putting a marker on it specifically of like, here's the green star, but hopefully, you know, we can do something in the map that makes it very clear, hey, this is where you should be going. Yeah, it's always a tough thing to figure out, like, what is the best player experience. We want it to be somewhat of a challenge sometimes, but not be so challenging that it's frustrating. Yeah.
First thing that happens when we make camp, the locals have to show their proof. Who's in charge? Two of my pirates got caught.
Another little bit of extra lore on Anka and her time in Cantha. This was added fairly late, I believe, after we got a few different playthroughs internally. We had some notes about, you know, that they really liked Anka, but they kind of wanted a little bit more of her personality to come through, and a little more motivation.
Mist portal device. Each of the captured Aether Blades had a piece she needed.
Then that mystery airship appears with a working model on board.
Anka cancels the negotiations and turns her focus to finding the airship. Which means we should probably find it first.
Hey, Commander, it's Ivan. Yo, from work?
Ivan from work.
Where can we all meet?
I've got my hands full with the speakers in Jade Brotherhood,
My
so I have to
brass.
sit this out. Rama's waiting at our village.
We're on our way.
Alright. Oops. Let's see. Which direction? South, southeast, right? Yeah. I was able to do, because we, you know, we have moments like the story team, because we got kind of a head start, we actually rolled off faster than the open world design team. So we got ahead of the open world teams, as I had mentioned before. So one of the things that we did was we had time in our schedule once we got story content to a good place, and we felt really comfortable with where we were, and we knew that from there it was just going to be polish and iteration. We actually set our story content aside for a minute, for a couple weeks at a time, and we did a couple stretches where we helped out the open world maps, and so a couple of these villages I helped base spawn, Karstadt and Teleri. You know, I didn't do all of it, but I did some of the NPC placement. I did some of the, you know, just scripted the NPCs to do things around the villages, basic stuff like that. But I mean, that stuff is super helpful because, you know, the map designers, they're often, you know, they're more concerned about, you know, making sure their events play well and making sure that their gameplay is solid. And that gets a lot more feedback than, you know, whether or not a village feels populated or alive. So, you know, where we can, we tend to, like, we don't, we do prioritize that stuff, but it's usually prioritized behind gameplay, which makes all the sense in the world to me. We don't, you know, we can't ship our game without gameplay. We could ship with a village that maybe could use some, you know, additional scripting to make it feel a little more alive. It's not ideal. You know, our ideal is that we have both, right? But given the choice, you know, we tended to prioritize our open world events and content like that. And so they, they needed some assistance at a couple points in development, and so because Connor and I were ahead on our story content, we were able to help out.
There's a hunger for more of these blankets in the city, you know. I could sell 5 times as many as you're making.
This was originally, we talked about adding, making it that this step, they wouldn't let you into the village without doing the heart here. But since we asked players to already do a full heart, we just felt, nah, that'd be asking too much for the player. Hopefully, by bringing the player into this village, they'll be wanting to do this heart at some point. They'll at least know that a heart exists, and as part of map completion, they'll want to come back and do it anyway.
Apparently, we're the first Asura and Dredge to be invited into the village.
Yeah, real honor. Maybe we should...
Right. Commander, that transponder the Kestrels found, it's weird, but it was on its own network.
But still technically Aetherblade. When I activated the transponders, it started broadcasting.
It's another one of our lovely Tengu models, new Tengu models. I absolutely love the designs of these new Tengu. They're just so gorgeous. Look at him. Or her. I don't remember if I made this
Sounds
I
like
think it's a
I'm headed
female
to
character,
Landry's
right?
Hope to find
Yeah.
us an airship. Good work, you two.
The nice thing about Tengu is you can have them be topless and regardless of their gender. Equality, man. That's what we're all about. And look at this adorable little guy. I'm sorry. I always have to take a pause when I see these puffball little Tengu. I will say, I think the kid version of this model looks better than the adult. The adult is a little bit, like, I will say, we got we got very conflicting feedback on the adult puffball model. A lot of people thought he was adorable and the cutest thing ever, and a lot of people at the studio were like, that is nightmare fuel, please, please don't ship this. But I don't know, maybe the proportions of the adult don't quite work with that big old puffy head. I'm not sure. For some people, that might be too much. Okay, anyway, we checked in with them. Yes, okay. I'm gonna get my bearings. Get my boat. This was also a very interesting part of the chapter to design, because trying to hide an airship in a map was not easy. I think we did a fairly successful job of it, but and we did it by subverting expectations, because I think people are like, oh, I'm looking for an airship, right? Clearly I got to be looking up in the sky. When no, in reality, they've docked inside a giant cavern, which is here, but that's not immediately obvious. So we did this sort of like, detracting circle with arrows again, the same way that we did with the Aetherblade heart. Oh god, these mushrooms are going to kill me. Anytime we bring hot creatures back, oh my gosh. Hot creatures were definitely lethal.
You have to help her. She isn't making any sense. Slow down.
Another thing, this is not specific to my content, but I think it's something worth pointing out. We got feedback that although the Void is introduced in Chapter 8, in the Golden Path, there really isn't a whole lot of interaction with the Void again until we get to near the end of the story. And so we definitely had feedback. I gave this feedback as well, that the Void kind of disappears and kind of doesn't really feel like a threat until you get to the end of the story. And we really wanted to try to solve that. So we had this idea, and Connor Fallon implemented all of these, where you could run into these little pocket pockets of void influence where this little girl has become possessed by void and starts talking in weird ways, and she's clearly possessed, and her father is freaked out, and the doctor is trying to help her, and like, again, just it it helps to keep that surfaced so that players realize that the threat is still out there, that it is sort of present across all the maps, because there's, I think, 5 of those moments in every map that you can just kind of randomly run into. And we tried to put them in highly trafficked areas so that they would be very visible and seen and experienced, so that we would really have this sense that, yeah, the void is spreading, and that it has very deleterious effects on Tyria. Deleterious. Ha ha ha. I just got that. Oh my god. Yeah. But I mean, it was kind of tricky to get this sort of like hot potato, cold potato mechanic in place. Well, at one point we had done it where as you got closer, it did what it's doing now, but as you got further away, it would like blow up again and be like, "No, you're moving farther away," right? Like, it was confusing, strangely enough. Like, we got a lot of feedback that it wasn't clear, like, because you would have the dialogue, and I think players associate, "Oh, I got a dialogue, I must be getting closer," and that wasn't the case. And so I think we ended up stripping out that like part of like you're getting colder, and surprisingly a lot of that feedback went away. Yeah, I'm not sure.
The signal doesn't lie. Take a look inside.
Yep. We had a lot of fun putting this airship in this giant canyon.
I'll keep you all posted.
And obviously we're going to run into our old friend Canuck here. We don't know that at this point in the story. We just think maybe it's Aether Blades. But we tried to establish that as soon as you get here, there's some revelers who are sleeping off their hangover, and they're Jade Brotherhood, and then over here we've got speakers.
Captain, we have a trespasser. Prepare deckside defenses.
We don't have any deckside defenses.
I can't remember if I kept them segregated in their own gangs, or if I had some gang interactions. I don't remember if I did that or not. We talked about that. These are all speakers.
Come on inside. We'll have a drink.
We drank all the drinks.
Kestrels. Or no, those are speakers too. Some party goers having a dance to the great music. There's a hidden achievement here that I threw in after we shipped, because we got feedback that we should have an achievement for dancing, and well, if I'm going to do a dancing achievement, there's only one way I would dance, and that is barefoot. So, unequip, take your shoes off, get down with your bad self. Yes, dancing barefoot. So yes, I have... You can put them back on. Alright. We also put these downstairs. Now, we had some... Oh no, they're still here. Okay, good. Yeah, the machines just don't have the animations anymore. We had these with the animations, and I don't remember. We ended up running into some... there's some ESRB things that are kind of weird around, and Peggy things that are weird around gambling in video games. So we had to be really careful about how we discuss this issue and approach this issue, and so we erred on the side of being conservative, and Canuck is running a social club, just so you know.
Commander, you are looking at the world's largest flying VIP social club and gourmet restaurant. Unfortunately, we lack the room.
Let's talk for a moment here. This was my doing. I will take credit for it. I will pat my own back, toot my own horn. When we decided that, yes, Canuck was going to be here and show up out of the blue without any warning and be running a VIP club, I'm like, well, he's got to look the part. You know, I mean, he's not going to be standing there in his armor. I mean, Saida is a pirate. She's always going to wear her pirate gear. But, you know, Canuck is a millionaire at this point. He's got to look the part. So I took the liberty of making him a composite where he's dressed as the most dapper I could possibly imagine him looking. I mean, what, you know, he's... you know, I may have been inspired by Kingpin from the Marvel Comics and given him a white suit. But, you know, he's Canuck, and he's a millionaire, and he's running a club. He's got to look like $1 million, right? So I think he looks like $1 million here. So yes, I absolutely am happy with that. That was one of my favorite things in this chapter. I know it's not much. Anyway, yes, that was it for this chapter.
She won't go down without a fight.
Yeah.
Should pick a spot where people are least likely to get hurt.
We had some back and forth on whether or not we were going to leave this cavern. But in the next chapter, which I will not be doing because that is not my content, so I'm not going to do an episode on that. I'm going to skip ahead to my next chapter, which will be chapter 13. So, yes. But where you pick up chapter 10, you're already on the airship. And so we thought, well, it wouldn't make sense for you to leave this cavern if you're just going to get on the airship. So we rejiggered some of the ending of the dialogues here to establish that, you know, we're leaving from here. And then the chapter ends here, and the instance entry is on the gangplank for the airship, so that, you know, it connects. Because that's really one of the things that's kind of important to us, is making sure that there is a linear connection between where one chapter ends and another begins. It doesn't always have to be in exactly the same spot or exactly the, you know, but you have to have kind of that mental connection of like, oh yeah, if I enter the instance here, I'm clearly going to be on or near the airship in the next chapter, and that's what happens. And so even though we originally had it be that you had to leave this cavern, which was cleaner from a design or scripting standpoint, because we could like make all of this stuff go away and you could be out in the open. And at one point too, like, we had it be that you were actually going to pick up chapter 10 at the entrance to the junkyard, and that was also something that we changed midstream. So anyhow, that's all that I think I have to say about chapter 9. What was that chapter even called? I don't remember anymore. To Catch a Spider. That's right. Yes, To Catch a Spider. So we are going to go catch a spider in the next chapter. But again, I will be skipping ahead in this series to chapter 13, where we are gonna meet up again in Arborstone and then head out onto the Jade Sea. But yeah, so for now, I'm going to say goodbye, and I will pick up with you in episode 16 when we go visit chapter 13. All right, take it easy. I hope you enjoyed this look into chapter 9, and I will see you soon.